Who is more likely to win the number 5 job, Kris Bubic or Daniel Lynch? We'll give you our thoughts next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, you are tuned in to another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Or you can catch us on wherever you listen to your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, or on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. For you first-time listeners out there, of course, welcome in. We are always bringing in new listeners every single day. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So go get started at FanDuel.com today. This was a segment that was brought to my attention the other day, mainly because of how Daniel Lynch has looked in spring training and how Kris Bubic, maybe in his last few outings, hasn't been as strong, but I do want to give credit where credit's due. One of our listeners who does bring up great segments from time to time, just reaching out to me through direct messaging. You can do that as well. If you have something you really want me to talk about and you don't want it to be in a Mailbag Friday, just send it my way, and it might be incorporated into one of our segments. But Cody on Twitter brought up this question, and it's been going around Royals Twitter, I'd imagine, over the last week or so. But who does deserve that number 5 spot, and how much stock should you put into what these guys have done in spring training? Because that's going to be really all we can evaluate going into the regular season is these spring training numbers. You might be able to pull from 2024, but Kris Bubic didn't start in 2024, and Daniel Lynch didn't really find success until he was moved to the bullpen late in 2024. I'm going to get out ahead of this before we dive into the why, and it's that I believe Kris Bubic has already won this job. That's my gut feeling right now. When you read Annie Rogers' opening day roster projection, which I believe she's done a few as well, Kris Bubic is the number 5 starter. Michael Lorenzen is the number 4. Now, in this question from Cody, it was more so about could they piggyback one of these guys, right? You have Lorenzen as the 4, and then Bubic and Daniel Lynch can split time as the number 5 or piggyback each other, where Daniel Lynch could be the opener, then it's Kris Bubic. It's a fair question, and with the way Matt Quatrero likes to handle his pitching staff, likes to handle his lineup, he is an innovative guy. He might mix and match a few pieces here and there, and if somebody's struggling in the rotation, that might be the plan of attack, which would be moving Daniel Lynch maybe to the opener role, or Kris Bubic takes up the opener role, and then you can piggyback the other guy to throw 3 or 4 innings in relief right after them. But with Daniel Lynch, it doesn't feel like you need to screw with what he's already been doing. Now, he's had a few spring training starts. He's also pitched out of the bullpen a little bit. Bubic has done the same. There was one outing where he pitched in relief against Chicago, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't that pretty, though he had some bad luck with soft contact and, not great defense behind him. However, spring training with these two, I believe, are 2 completely different paths. What you were hoping to see out of each of these guys. For Kris Bubic, I'm not sold that it was going to be performance-based. I heard JJ Piccolo on Sunday during the broadcast evaluate Carlos Hernandez. He was asked a few times while he was on the mound, and he said with Carlos, it's not necessarily performance-based. We want to see a couple different things, him throwing different pitches, him having good command. And I think that Kris Bubic had the same form of evaluation of we're trying to stretch him out. He was stretched out in the offseason. I spoke to Kris down in Surprise. He had mentioned that had been his plan all offseason long. And I'm going off that. Kris Bubic could have come in and had an 8+ ERA when spring training comes to an end. And I don't know if I would change my opinion that he would be moved to the bullpen, because it makes zero sense to me to tell Kris Bubic to stretch out after how effective he was in the bullpen and say, well, let's get you stretched out in the offseason, spend your entire time training as if you're going to start, and then come spring training, it's going to come down to your performance. Like, on the surface, just the spring training numbers, you would give that job to Daniel Lynch. He's been very effective in the zone. He has limited hard contact. He's kept the ball in the yard. He's doing what he did last year in September out of the bullpen. But it is spring training. And as I've said before, even with some of the bullpen guys that are locks, it's going to matter a little bit, but not for everybody out there. I've said it with the bench players that are fighting for a spot. It matters for them, may not matter for other guys out there. Like Lucas Erceg, as I mentioned in yesterday's episode, he has not been very good out of the bullpen. Does it matter? No. With Daniel Lynch, it did, because I'm not sure he was going to be a lock even with a strong spring. If he would have come in from the offseason, gotten bombed in spring training, or looked the way that Carlos Hernandez did, I don't believe he would have been a shoo-in. With Kris Bubic, he was always going to be a shoo-in. It was a matter of, is he a starter? Is he a reliever? And when I spoke to Kris down in Surprise, I just didn't get that feel that it could be one or the other. It sounded like when he had the success, that was great, Kris, but we view you as a starter. And we want you to be a starter once you have completely come back from Tommy John. You've had the success. We know that's in your arsenal. We know you have that ability. However, we need to see it in the rotation. We want to see it in the rotation. Whereas with Daniel Lynch, the word that I would, or the term I should say, that I would use to describe his success is don't get greedy. Right? You have finally found a role for Daniel Lynch that he has thrived in. Not just pitched well or had spurts here and there where he's looked good like Carlos Hernandez. I'm referencing him again. No, Daniel Lynch, when he got recalled in August, had 20 consecutive scoreless innings. That's good enough to label him, a good relief option. That's a big enough sample size to label him a good option in the bullpen. 20 consecutive scoreless innings. I don't care what your ERA looked like before that. If you were a great pitcher, if you were a bad pitcher, you throw 20 consecutive scoreless innings, or however much it was. I know it was in the 20s. You are called a reliable option. I have no issue going to you at any point in the game. Maybe not for the 9th inning. However, if they needed Daniel Lynch for the 7th or the 8th, I wouldn't have batted an eye in September because of how he looked. When you see it in spring training, I don't have this urge to say, well, let's see if he can do it in the rotation. I really don't. I'd imagine that Daniel Lynch can make some spot starts in 2025. In fact, I would bet a lot of money on the fact that he would be starting a few games for the Royals just based off injuries, double headers. You need a guy to spot start. If somebody's to go down, he probably has the first crack at it, unless Alec Marsh is looking really good in AAA or he's doing better than Daniel Lynch in the bullpen, and you feel strongly that he can be stretched out rather quickly. But I do believe Daniel Lynch would have that first crack. He had the first crack last year when Alec Marsh went down. It didn't go as well. And over the course of his career, Daniel Lynch has not been an effective starter. His stuff has not played well in the rotation. And 20 good innings out of the bullpen doesn't make me go, he's ready again for the rotation. It makes me go, he needs to stay in the bullpen. That role is still valuable. The long relief role, the guy who can give you 2 innings when the bullpen is taxed and you're in the 6th and 7th inning with the 1-run game, he's going to throw strikes. He's going to limit the hard contact. He's had good off-speed pitches of late. And in spring training, he's done more of the same of what we saw in September. That, to me, shows he's worthy of a spot. And I don't believe you need to overthink it. You really don't. Kris Bubic should get the first crack in the rotation simply because he's done it the whole offseason. He is stretched out and prepared to start. If you abandon that due to spring training numbers, that's bad on your part. If Kris Bubic struggles on his own in the regular season, starting as the number 5 guy, well, then you can move him to the bullpen. You know it can work there. That's the difference between him and Daniel Lynch. Daniel Lynch has not proven it in the rotation. He's shown it in the bullpen. Now, your point could be, well, hang on now. Kris Bubic has never really shown it in the rotation. I almost think that his start in 2023 before Tommy John was good enough to bookmark, if you will, stash it away and go, that was pacing, even though it was a few starts in April, to be a really good year for him. The slider, the spin rate, the location, the command, everything about what he was doing through spring training and the beginning of the regular season was screaming that he was going to be the bounce back player of the year. He was finally going to have that strong season. And to me, there's no harm in trying him again in the rotation. For Daniel Lynch, he's had enough time starting games to prove that he's not really that deserving of a spot, even with a strong spring. He's got a good spot in the bullpen, and it may not be his desired role, but if you're one of those 26 and you're on a team that is expected to make the postseason, you continue to pitch well, you might get that opportunity again. So circling all the way back to this point that Cody asked, could you piggyback one of these guys? It's possible. If Kris Bubic can only go 4 innings early on in the season, then yes, piggyback him with Daniel Lynch. Give Kris Bubic 4, give Daniel Lynch 3. That also might be what the Royals intend on doing, because I do know they're not throwing Kris Bubic out there from the get-go and say, give us 6 or 7 in the same way they will with Cole Reagans and Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha, and even Michael Lorenzen for that matter. Those 4 are locks. The number 5 spot, I just haven't changed my opinion on it. It's going to be Kris Bubic, or I'm going to be floored by it. You stretched out Bubic in the offseason. He's been starting in spring training. You're not going to abandon that based off spring training numbers. Daniel Lynch, he showed you at the tail end of the regular season in a playoff push, by the way. That's a good spot for him. He can still be that number 6 starter. You're going to need him to start some games. However, to win some games, that role in the bullpen is still very vital, and I like Daniel Lynch there. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, a big-time injury happened in the AL East and happened to the reigning American League champs, the New York Yankees. Gerrit Cole out for the year in 2025. How does that impact them, the AL East, and most importantly, for this podcast, how does it affect the Royals? We'll tell you next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor today. We got 2 of them, but for the first one, it is Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? SupplyHouse.com offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free TradeMaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the TradeMaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. And before we dive into our second segment, got a comment on our previous episode, so I want to make sure I can help out any way I can about audio problems. So I do take that very seriously. Just need to know if it's still happening on this one, because when I go back and listen to the video on my computer, I'm not always able to tell what everybody else is listening. If it's connection issues, would love to know. I can better my router or my Wi-Fi, strengthen it, if you will. If it's too loud, I can turn down the volume. If it's too quiet, same thing there. I can turn up the volume. So if it's still happening on this episode, definitely leave a comment below so I can get to work on that. Don't want to continue making the same mistakes on every single episode. But back to baseball, the big news of yesterday was Gerrit Cole being sidelined for the entire 2025 season, and per Bob Nightingale, might be a little bit of 2026 as well. But with Tommy John surgery, his injury woes continue as a member of the New York Yankees. When he was healthy last year, he was vintage Gerrit Cole. He was so dominant. The Royals got that up front and close in the postseason, game 4 and game 2, or game 1, in the ALDS. One of them, they were on him. Surprisingly, it was in the Bronx at Yankee Stadium. But in game 4, Gerrit Cole was unhittable, and the Royals could not touch him. There were a couple of close calls. Kyle Isbell almost went yard. MJ Melendez almost went yard. But he is somebody that still strikes a lot of fear into opposing hitters. And now you evaluate the Yankees. You look over their roster and look at their rotation. They still are a favorite to win that division. It just so happens that they're dealing with some pretty significant injuries despite that high expectation. The Yankees are always going to have high expectations. They are going to be a first or second place finisher in the American League East more often than not. But these are starting to add up a little bit. Speaking of those injuries, Gerrit Cole out for the year. Luis Gil, another valuable member of that rotation, out for a chunk of time. Giancarlo Stanton dealing with severe injuries in both elbows. So he's dealing with a lot of pain in both elbows, and we know about the injury past of Stanton. And now you're trying to fix things and patch things before opening day. There's the reports out there of, well, they might go after Dylan Cease or they go after Sandy Alcantara of the Marlins. It's not that simple, right? It's going to take a haul to get both of those guys. And we got 17 days from opening day. The Yankees are not going to be able to patch that together before the start of the season. They can revisit that at some point later on. And who knows, they might shock me and they go out there and acquire another big name arm. Because Gerrit Cole's not coming back. Luis Gil is going to be coming back. Gerrit Cole, though, was supposed to be that 1-2 punch with Max Fried. And I even saw today that Aaron Boone commented Max Fried might not be our opening day starter because it might not, line up like that. Max Fried could be somebody that pitches the second or the third game. That's not important. They would just pivot to a Carlos Rodon to start. But there's some concern there. There has to be concern there, being the defending American League champs. You lose Juan Soto, you strengthen the rotation, you strengthen the bullpen, but the pressure's on. And they have had to deal with Gerrit Cole getting hurt in the past and missing a lot of time. It's different to deal with an entire season. It's different to piece together a rotation that's missing such a superb talent. And now the American League East appears a little bit more wide open than it was about 72 hours ago. I know there was the fear and there was the concern of Tommy John surgery, but then Gerrit Cole got the second opinion. It was confirmed yesterday, so I can't quite remember if it was 3 or 4 days ago. But now the Yankees are going to have to deal without one of their top arms. And offensively, you don't have Juan Soto. You went out there and got Cody Bellinger. Pressure's immediately on him. How healthy is Stanton going to be? Don't have Gleyber Torres either. I'm not trying to spin this segment into the Yankees are bad now. The AL East is just the best division in the American League. Baltimore's good. Boston got better. Toronto got better. The Rays are pesky. The Rays could sneak up and win 90 games for all I know. They do a lot with a little. It just doesn't feel like the same Yankees. Last year, they were a juggernaut. You had to go through that top of the order that was so fearsome, and it's still a tough lineup. And Gerrit Cole does change the rotation. I believed Max Fried was already going to be the better arm. However, not to have Gerrit Cole in the rotation the entire year, that changes things. If you're the Royals, you're going back to that series and saying to yourself, he was a big reason why we were sent home. When you were facing elimination in Game 4, and Gerrit Cole was standing in your way. Even though you had the success, it almost felt like that was the game we should have got them. We had pounced on Gerrit Cole. We had a lead in game one. We coughed that one up. You don't get Gerrit Cole twice in too many postseason series. He's too good. He was dominant in Houston. He was good from time to time in Pittsburgh whenever the Pirates are in there. He did get bombed by Kyle Schwarber in that one wild card start. But with the Astros, with the Yankees, he's usually been very good. Now they don't have that. So if you look to the future, and the Royals are lucky enough to get back to October, get to the postseason, and let's say you run into the Yankees again. Even if the Yankees have won 95 games and they're a juggernaut once again, you're not dealing with Juan Soto. That was already a given. But who knows if Stanton's still playing in that lineup? You're not dealing with Gleyber Torres, though he's in Detroit now. So you got to deal with him far more than he did last season. And Gleyber Torres did cause some damage to the Royals pitching staff in the postseason. But with Cole, factor this in here. Game one, they're going Max Fried. We're going toe-to-toe here. Play the fun hypothetical game. Cole Reagans, Max Fried, game one, starter versus game one starter. Game two, Yankees are going to have to pivot to Carlos Rodon, which they already did in game two. Then you get to game three. There's Clark Schmidt, who started there. But having that game four uncertainty, and maybe they would make a move at the deadline. If the Yankees are in it, they'll have the capital to go out there and trade away some pieces to bring in a frontline starter. On the off chance they don't, that's where game four becomes pivotal of they can't turn to Gerrit Cole. Max Fried could be that guy they turn back to depending when the off days could happen. But having that extra arm, that's what made them so scary in my opinion. Max Fried, facing him twice in a series, we saw how good Max Fried was against the Royals in Atlanta to close the year. But having Fried and Cole, that felt insurmountable. You got to face them game one and game two. That's tough. Avoiding Gerrit Cole all year, you get to postseason time. I never, ever wish injuries on any player. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm simply just saying that it impacts things. It impacts them for the entirety of the regular season. Even though they've won a lot of games before without him, to have somebody that good paired with somebody as good as Max Fried and a bullpen that good, that made me believe they could be as good as they were last year without Juan Soto. Cody Bellinger looks good. You play off that rotation in that bullpen, it can truly change things. But now he's out for the entire year. Max Fried has the added pressure. As I said with Cody Bellinger filling in for Juan Soto, Max Fried now has that pressure to live up to the contract day one. He can't hide behind Gerrit Cole in the contract he got. He's got to be the ace, the frontline starter for the reigning American League champs. He knew that when signing that deal. Just makes things a little bit harder now when you don't have one of the best aces that we've seen post-2010 in all of baseball. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, is Nick Pratto going to grab one of those final bench spots? I'll give you my thoughts next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our title sponsor in FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything on buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all summer long. Again, that's FanDuel.com to get in on all the madness before the tournament begins. And also, I'm sure a lot of people will be betting on FanDuel throughout the NCAA tournament, whether it be the round of 32 or all the way into the national championship game. For my pick, I'll stay conference tournaments. Game coming up here shortly between K-State and Arizona State in Kansas City. I'll take the over on points for David Gasson. Going back to an article that was posted by Annie Rogers this morning, her opening day roster projection, it is a little bit different than what I had. And as I mentioned in that episode we did about roster projections, it was going to be a constant changing thing where I might do 3 or 4 episodes before opening day on my projections because there's not a locked in answer for the bench spots. There's not 3 or 4 guys I am locked in and believe this is going to be the guy for the first couple months of the season, or this is the guy they're loving in camp. I mean, they do love Kevin Biggio. He's also struggled of late, and he's on a minor league deal. You have to make a move to add him to the roster. I thought Nelson Velasquez was going to do enough in camp, and since they were looking at Adam Duvall as that right-handed power bat off the bench, Nelson Velasquez younger, cheaper, makes sense for the roster fit. He's hitting sub 100 in spring training, and he's one of those guys who needed to play well. He had to earn a spot. Drew Waters, Nick Pratto, they have to earn a spot. Joey Wiemer has to earn a spot, and they haven't. Simply put, they have not done enough, any of those guys, to be given an opportunity on opening day. Maybe not to start, just to stand out there during starting introductions or starting lineups or the introductions, whatever you want to call them. They had to earn their way onto that roster. And I would have loved to see two of them put together a really strong spring where you can give them an attaboy on their way out of surprise and say, join us in Kansas City because you did enough. I just can't say that about any of them. Back to this article that Annie Rogers put out there. She has Nick Pratto on the opening day roster. He's out of options. He has been playing the outfield a little bit to showcase that flexibility. He's played the outfield before at the big league level. Not well, I might add. He can play out there. He's not learning it for the first time. And that showed everybody the Royals are giving him an extended look. You can handle the outfield. You can place him first base. You show that the bat still has enough juice in it, and you can earn that spot. It has helped him that Joey Wiemer has not hit well at the plate. Nelson Velasquez has been unplayable. And even though he's not playing his best, he's not putting up the same spring training numbers as last year. The defensive flexibility, being a first-round pick, being a homegrown talent, you might give him the nod. I'm still not sold, and I'm not there yet on putting him with the 26-man roster, even though he's out of options. I'm not there yet. The bat really struggles at the big league level. Too much swing and miss. Unfortunately, nobody else is showing that their bat doesn't have a ton of swing and miss. Nelson Velasquez strikes out a lot, and he's not looked good in spring. Joey Wiemer can strike out a lot. Drew Waters can strike out a lot. I didn't have Dairon Blanco on my opening day roster, but Annie Rogers has reported that he's now played in a couple of minor league games. He's working his way back. If he stays healthy, he probably grabs one of those final spots. Because of his ability to make an impact on the base paths, he can play all three outfield positions. He was there the entirety of last year. Now that he's healthier sooner than I expected, I got no reason to believe he's not making the roster. Nick Lofton has that chance. Wasn't on Annie Rogers' opening day roster projection. So with Nick Pratto, he's got a couple more opportunities to prove that one of these spots is mine. I've earned this spot. It wasn't just that I was out of options and the Royals weren't willing to cut bait with him. That swing and miss has to come down. The outfield defense has to be better. You don't need to have a rocket of an arm. We're talking about a bench bat at the end of the day. When I'm talking about a bench bat, you might get in once a week. You might be a pinch hitter. He's always had that great ability to draw walks, something that Wiemer didn't do at the big league level. He has at the minor league level. Nelson Velasquez has not done at the big league level. Drew Waters has not done at the big league level. Nick Lofton has not done at the big league level. Biggio, he's going to be somebody that's probably not going to hit above 250 coming off the bench, but he's going to put together a really good at bat. He might have a double-digit walk rate. If Nick Pratto can do that and not be a liability in the outfield, he's got that chance to make the roster. And it's helping him right now that nobody else competing for a spot has separated themselves. He hasn't either, but being one of those guys like Velasquez that's out of options, it might come down to them. And Pratto, by a slim margin, does have the edge over him. Small margin, but still enough. And with 16 days to go before opening day, somebody's going to have to make some moves and start playing better Maybe the Royals believe that can be Nick Pratto. Okay, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, check out the Locked On Fantasy Baseball Podcast with host Dominic Martino and Matthew Ane. MLB fantasy draft season is here. Be the most informed fan and set yourself up for a league win. Find Locked On Podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, it is going to be a morning episode that we put out there. Might recap what's happened over the last few games. Cole Reagan's velocity looked phenomenal. He looks like he's ready to go. Ursic's struggling a little bit, and Steven Cruz did have a pretty impressive outing. Would he take one of those final bullpen spots? We'll talk about all of that tomorrow, but until tomorrow morning, you take it easy, Kansas City.